"She's dead weight," Corporal Jackson muttered, adjusting his tactical vest as the team prepared for the dawn patrol. "Why are we babysitting some desk jockey from headquarters?" The other Marines nodded in agreement, their eyes barely glancing at the woman methodically checking her equipment in the corner of the armory. She moved with quiet precision, her movements economical and practiced, but to them, she was just another burden they'd have to carry through the unforgiving terrain of eastern Syria. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." The woman in question was Captain Elena Vasquez, 31 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail and eyes the color of storm clouds. At 5 feet 6 inches, she carried herself with an understated confidence that most people mistook for timidity. Her uniform bore the insignia of intelligence analysis, and her official designation read Information Specialist, Non-Combat Operations. To the hardened Marines of Echo Company, she was an outsider, a paper pusher who had somehow wrangled her way into their dangerous world. The mission briefing had been straightforward enough. Intelligence suggested that a high-value target, a bomb maker responsible for several attacks on coalition forces, was operating out of a compound in the Deir ez-Zor province. The terrain was hostile, the enemy well-entrenched, and the political situation delicate. This wasn't the kind of operation where you wanted dead weight, and Captain Vasquez's presence felt like a liability to every man on the team. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the team leader, had made his feelings clear during the pre-mission brief. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this is a direct action mission. We move fast, we hit hard, and we extract. You sure you can keep up?" His tone was professional, but the underlying message was unmistakable. Elena had simply nodded, her expression neutral, and continued organizing her gear. The forward operating base outside El Hasika was a testament to military efficiency and barely controlled chaos. Dust swirled constantly in the desert wind, coating everything in a fine layer of grit that seemed to seep into every piece of equipment, every article of clothing, every breath of air. The base housed approximately 200 personnel, a mix of special operations forces, intelligence analysts, and support staff. It was the kind of place where reputations were made and broken, where the difference between life and death often came down to split-second decisions and absolute trust in your teammates. Elena had arrived at the base 3 weeks earlier, part of an intelligence support package designed to provide real-time analysis of enemy communications and movement patterns. Her background, according to the official records, was unremarkable. She had graduated from the Naval Academy with a degree in Middle Eastern Studies, completed officer training, and spent the subsequent years working in various intelligence analysis roles. Nothing in her file suggested combat experience, and certainly nothing that would explain why she insisted on carrying a modified M4 carbine instead of the standard issue sidearm typically assigned to intelligence personnel. The other members of Echo Company had taken to calling her Professor, a nickname that was meant to be dismissive, but which Elena accepted with the same quiet dignity she displayed in all her interactions. She spent her days in the operations center, hunched over computer screens and satellite imagery, cross-referencing communications, intercepts with known enemy patterns. Her work was thorough, her analysis precise, but to the operators, she was just another analyst who had never felt the weight of hostile fire or the terror of being pinned down in any territory. What they didn't know, what her carefully sanitized personnel file didn't reveal, was that Elena Vasquez had spent the previous 4 years as part of a classified program known as Gray Fox, an elite reconnaissance unit that operated in the shadows of America's most dangerous conflicts. The program didn't officially exist. Its operators carried no identification, and their missions were never acknowledged by any government agency. When Gray Fox was disbanded following a political scandal, its members were scattered to the winds. their records scrubbed, their identities carefully reconstructed to hide their true capabilities. Elena had requested the intelligence assignment, specifically because she was tired of killing. She had seen too much, lost too many friends, and carried too many secrets to continue operating in the dark world of special operations. The analyst role was supposed to be her chance to serve her country without having to pull the trigger, to use her mind instead of her marksmanship skills, to find some measure of peace in a career that had been defined by violence. The morning of the mission dawned clear and cold, the desert air sharp with the promise of another scorching day. Echo Company assembled in the pre-dawn darkness, their gear checked and rechecked, their weapons loaded and ready. The target compound was located approximately 30 kilometers from the base, nestled in a valley that provided natural concealment, but also created a tactical nightmare for any attacking force. Intelligence suggested that the bomb maker, known only by the coding name Architect, was meeting with local cell leaders to coordinate future operations. Elena had been the one to identify the meeting through her analysis of intercepted communications. She had tracked the Architect's digital footprint across multiple platforms, correlated his movements with known associates, and pinpointed the location where he would be most vulnerable. It was brilliant analytical work, the kind of intelligence breakthrough that could save dozens of lives. But to the Marines loading into the helicopters, she was still just the desk jockey they were babysitting. The flight to the target area took 40 minutes, the helicopters flying low and fast across the desert landscape. Elena sat quietly in the back of the aircraft, her eyes closed, her breathing steady and controlled. To the untrained observer, she might have appeared to be sleeping, but she was actually running through the mission parameters in her mind, visualizing the terrain, calculating angles and distances, preparing for contingencies that she hoped would never arise. The compound was a typical Middle Eastern structure, built around a central courtyard and surrounded by high walls that provided both privacy and defensive positions. Intelligence suggested that the Architect was meeting with approximately 6 to 8 associates, along with whatever security personnel he might have brought with him. The plan was straightforward. Insert at dawn, surround the compound, and capture or eliminate the target before he could escape. What the intelligence hadn't revealed was that the Architect had been expecting them. As the helicopters approached the landing zone, the morning silence was shattered by the distinctive sound of heavy machine gun fire. Tracer rounds streaked across the sky, forcing the pilots to take evasive action and abort the primary landing site. Instead of the quick insertion they had planned, Echo Company found themselves scattered across nearly a kilometer of hostile territory, separated from their objective and taking fire from multiple directions. Elena's helicopter was forced to land behind a rocky outcropping nearly 800 meters from the target compound. As the Marines disembarked and began returning fire, she quickly assessed the tactical situation. The enemy had established overlapping fields of fire that made any direct approach to the compound impossible. Worse, they had positioned snipers on the surrounding hills, creating a deadly crossfire that was systematically picking off anyone who moved in the open. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was shouting orders over the radio, trying to coordinate his scattered team while bullets whined overhead. 2 of his men were already down, one with a leg wound that would require immediate medical attention, another with a more serious injury that had him calling for a medic. The situation was rapidly deteriorating, and without some kind of intervention, Echo Company was going to suffer serious casualties. Elena had positioned herself behind a boulder, her M4 carbine ready but unused. She watched the battlefield with the calculating eyes of someone who had been in similar situations before, noting the enemy positions, tracking their movements, identifying their weaknesses. The Marines around her were brave and well-trained, but they were fighting a conventional battle against an enemy who had chosen the ground and prepared their positions carefully. Through her rifle scope, Elena could see the problem clearly. The enemy's heavy machine gun was positioned in a fortified bunker approximately 600 meters away, commanding a clear view of the entire landing zone. As long as that gun remained operational, Echo Company would be pinned down, unable to maneuver, and vulnerable to the sniper fire that was already taking its toll. The machine gun had to be eliminated, but it was positioned in such a way that none of the Marines could get a clear shot without exposing themselves to lethal fire. Elena studied the terrain, calculating wind speed and direction, accounting for the slight elevation difference between her position and the target. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 600 meters was a challenging shot under the best of circumstances, but with the stress of combat, the noise and confusion of the battlefield, and the knowledge that lives hung in the balance, it was the kind of shot that separated true marksmen from weekend warriors. She had made shots like this before, in places whose names never appeared on any official reports, against enemies whose deaths were never acknowledged by any government. But that was supposed to be behind her now. She was supposed to be an analyst, a support person, someone who contributed to the war effort without having to take lives. Yet as she watched Rodriguez trying to coordinate his team while bullets kicked up dust around his position, she realized that sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Elena chambered around, adjusted her scope for distance and wind, and began to control her breathing. The familiar calm descended over her, the same focused tranquility that had made her one of Gray Fox's most effective operators. Time seemed to slow as she tracked the machine gun position, waiting for the perfect moment when the gunner would be exposed for just long enough to make the shot count. The Marines around her were still focused on their immediate threats, returning fire at targets they could barely see, trying to suppress the enemy positions enough to allow for some kind of tactical movement. None of them noticed Elena settling into her shooting position. None of them saw her steady her rifle against the boulder. None of them were aware that their supposed burden was about to become their salvation. The shot, when it came, was perfect. A single round, fired with surgical precision, traveled 600 meters in just over a second and found its target with devastating effect. The enemy machine gun fell silent, its operator slumping over his weapon, and suddenly the tactical situation began to shift in favor of Echo Company. Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio, confusion evident in his tone. Who took that shot? Did anyone have eyes on the machine gun nest? There was a moment of silence as each Marine checked in, denying responsibility for the shot that had just saved their lives. Elena said nothing, simply chambered another round and began scanning for the next target. The enemy snipers, emboldened by their early success, had begun to move to new positions, trying to maintain their advantage over the scattered Marines. Elena tracked their movement through her scope, noting their patterns, predicting their next positions. These were skilled fighters, but they were making the mistake of assuming that their opponents were typical infantry soldiers, unaware that they were being hunted by someone with very different capabilities. The second shot eliminated a sniper who had been systematically targeting the Marines' medic. The third took out another enemy fighter who was trying to flank Rodriguez's position. Each shot was precise, clinical, and devastating in its effect. But to the Marines on the ground, focused on their own immediate survival, the shots seemed to be coming from nowhere, fired by a guardian angel who remained invisible and anonymous. Elena's training had taught her to think in terms of systems rather than individual targets. The enemy wasn't just a collection of fighters. They were a network of mutually supporting positions, each one covering the others, each one contributing to the overall defensive scheme. To defeat them, you had to understand the system and then systematically dismantle it, removing key nodes until the entire network collapsed. The fourth shot targeted the enemy's communications specialist, a figure she had identified moving between positions and coordinating the defense. With their communications disrupted, the enemy fighters began to lose coordination, their movements becoming less synchronized, their fire less effective. Elena continued her methodical work, each shot carefully planned and flawlessly executed. Each target selected for maximum psychological and tactical impact. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was beginning to realize that something extraordinary was happening. The enemy fire was slackening, their positions were being eliminated one by one, and his Marines were suddenly able to move with a freedom that had been impossible just minutes before. But the shots were coming from somewhere behind his position, from the direction of the landing zone where he had left the intelligence analyst with the rest of the support personnel. Elena had moved to a new position, using the terrain to mask her movement and provide better angles on the remaining enemy. Positions. She had learned long ago that the key to effective sniping wasn't just marksmanship. It was understanding the psychology of the battlefield, knowing how to use fear and confusion as weapons just as deadly as bullets. By remaining invisible, by striking without warning, she was creating a sense of helplessness among the enemy fighters that was more demoralizing than any direct assault. The compound that had seemed so impregnable just an hour before was now vulnerable. The defensive positions that had been so carefully prepared were compromised, their occupants eliminated or forced to abandon their posts. Elena could see enemy fighters beginning to withdraw, their discipline breaking down as they realized they were being systematically hunted by an opponent they couldn't see or predict. But the architect was still in the compound, still the primary objective of the mission. Elena knew that he would be trying to escape, probably through one of the back exits that intelligence had identified, but which the scattered Marines were in no position to cover. She adjusted her position again, moving to a rocky promontory that provided overwatch on the compound's rear approaches. Through her scope, she could see figures moving in the compound's courtyard, preparing for what looked like an organized withdrawal. The architect would be among them, probably disguised as one of the security personnel, trying to blend in with the crowd. Elena had studied his photographs, memorized his gait, his mannerisms, the subtle details that would allow her to identify him even at a distance. The shot, when it came, was the most difficult of the day. The target was moving, partially concealed by other figures, at a distance of nearly 700 meters. Elena had to account for wind, elevation, and the movement of both her target and the people around him. It was the kind of shot that required not just skill, but instinct, the ability to predict where the target would be rather than where he was. The bullet found its mark, and the architect collapsed in the compound's courtyard, his associates scattering in panic. The primary objective had been achieved, but Elena's work wasn't finished. She continued to provide overwatch as Echo Company finally began their assault on the compound, her rifle ensuring that no enemy fighter would be able to mount an effective defense. By the time the sun had fully risen, the battle was over. The compound was secured, the architect was dead, and Echo Company had suffered only minor casualties. Nothing like the bloodbath that had seemed inevitable during the early moments of the engagement. But as the Marines began to police the battlefield and prepare for extraction, one question remained unanswered. Who had been providing the covering fire that had made their victory possible? Elena had already moved back to her original position, her rifle cleaned and secured, her expression neutral and professional. When Rodriguez found her, she was sitting quietly behind the boulder where she had started the day, looking for all the world like someone who had spent the morning taking cover rather than taking lives. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said, his voice carefully controlled, "we need to talk." Elena looked up at him, her storm-gray eyes revealing nothing. "Is there a problem, Staff Sergeant?" Someone was providing sniper support during the engagement. Professional-level shooting, maybe the best I've ever seen. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Elena stood up, shouldering her rifle with practiced ease. "I'm just an analyst, Staff Sergeant. I observe and report. That's what I'm trained for." But Rodriguez had been in the Marines for 12 years, and he had seen enough combat to recognize the signs. The way Elena moved, the way she carried her weapon, the calm certainty in her voice, these weren't the characteristics of someone whose experience was limited to intelligence analysis. More importantly, he had noticed that Elena's M4 was equipped with a high-powered scope, and that the barrel was still warm despite the morning's chill. "Ma'am, with all due respect, intelligence analysts don't typically carry sniper-configured weapons." Elena smiled, an expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I believe in being prepared, Staff Sergeant. You never know when you might need to make a long-distance observation." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the extraction helicopters, their rotor wash kicking up clouds of dust that made further discussion impossible. But as Echo Company loaded their wounded and prepared to return to base, Rodriguez made a mental note to do some research into Captain Elena Vasquez's background. Something about her story didn't add up, and he was determined to find out what it was. The flight back to base was quieter than the morning's insertion. The Marines subdued by the intensity of the combat they had just survived. Elena sat in the same position she had occupied on the way out, her eyes closed, her breathing steady and controlled. But this time, the other Marines were watching her, noticing details they had missed before, beginning to suspect that the woman they had dismissed as dead weight might be something else entirely. Back at Al-Hasaka, Elena submitted her after-action report with the same quiet professionalism she brought to all her duties. The report was factual and concise, focusing on the intelligence aspects of the mission and making no mention of the sniper fire that had been so crucial to the operation's success. As far as the official record was concerned, Echo Company had conducted a textbook assault on a fortified position, eliminating the target through superior tactics and aggressive maneuvering. But unofficial stories had a way of spreading through military communities, and within hours of their return, whispers were circulating about the mysterious sniper who had saved Echo Company from what should have been a disastrous engagement. The Marines who had been on the mission found themselves fielding questions from their colleagues, trying to explain something they didn't fully understand themselves. Elena, meanwhile, had returned to her duties in the operations center, analyzing communications intercepts and preparing intelligence summaries with the same methodical precision she had always displayed. To the casual observer, she was the same unremarkable analyst who had been at the base for 3 weeks, focused on her work and seemingly oblivious to the speculation swirling around her. But Rodriguez wasn't willing to let the matter drop. That evening, he made his way to the operations center, ostensibly to discuss the intelligence aspects of the morning's mission, but really to get another look at the woman who had saved his team. He found Elena alone in the center, working late as she often did, her attention focused on a series of satellite images displayed on multiple monitors. "Working late again, ma'am," Rodriguez said, settling into a chair across from her workstation. Elena looked up from her screens, her expression neutral. "Intelligence doesn't keep regular hours, Staff Sergeant." "The enemy certainly doesn't." Rodriguez nodded, then gestured toward the images on her screens. "What are you looking at?" "Follow up on today's operation. The Architect's network is larger than we initially thought. I'm trying to map the connections, identify the key players, predict their next moves." It was exactly the kind of work you would expect from an intelligence analyst. But Rodriguez noticed that Elena's workspace was organized with an almost military precision that went beyond standard requirements. Her equipment was arranged for maximum efficiency. Her notes were coded in a way that suggested operational security training, and her computer setup included encryption protocols that seemed unusually sophisticated for someone in her position. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" Elena saved her work and turned to face him. "Of course. That rifle you carry. It's not standard issue for intelligence personnel." Elena's expression didn't change, but Rodriguez thought he detected a slight tension in her posture. "I modified it myself." Better optics, improved accuracy. I find that good equipment makes for better observations. And the shooting? Where did you learn to shoot like that? Like what, Staff Sergeant? Rodriguez studied her face, looking for any sign of deception or discomfort. Ma'am, I've been in the Marines for 12 years. I've worked with some of the best shooters in the Corps. What I saw today wasn't just good shooting. It was professional-level marksmanship. The kind of shooting that takes years to develop and constant practice to maintain. Elena was quiet. For a long moment, her fingers drumming silently on her desk. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. I've always been good with weapons, Staff Sergeant. Some people have a natural aptitude. Natural aptitude doesn't explain what happened today. Those shots were made under combat conditions, at extended ranges, with multiple variables to account. 4. That's not natural talent. That's training. Specialized training. Elena stood up, her movements fluid and controlled. Staff Sergeant, I appreciate your curiosity, but I'm not sure what you're trying to suggest. Rodriguez stood as well, his eyes never leaving her face. I'm suggesting that you're not who you appear to be, ma'am. I'm suggesting that Captain Elena Vasquez, intelligence analyst, is a cover story. And I'm suggesting that whoever you really are, you saved my team today, and I think I have a right to know who I'm thanking. Elena walked to the window, looking out at the base's perimeter, where guards walked their posts under the harsh glare of security lights. The desert stretched away into darkness, empty and hostile, full of dangers that most people couldn't imagine. When she turned back to Rodriguez, there was something different in her expression, a hardness that hadn't been there before. Some stories are better left untold, Staff Sergeant. Some identities are better left buried. What happened today was a team effort. Your Marines performed admirably under difficult conditions. That's what matters. Rodriguez shook his head. Ma'am, with respect, that's not good enough. My team has a right to know who they're serving with. If you're some kind of special operations asset, if you've got capabilities that aren't reflected in your official records, then we need to know about it. It affects how we plan missions, how we assess risks, how you judge whether I'm worth protecting, Elena interrupted, her voice sharp. How you decide whether I'm dead weight or an asset. Rodriguez had the grace to look uncomfortable. Ma'am, I never said. You didn't have to say it, Staff Sergeant. It was obvious from the moment I arrived. The intelligence analyst who didn't belong. The desk jockey who was going to slow down the real operators. I've heard it all before. In other places, with other teams. Elena moved back to her desk, her movements betraying a tension that hadn't been there moments before. The truth is, Staff Sergeant, that I've spent the last 4 years trying to forget who I used to be. I've tried to build a new identity, a new purpose, a new way of serving that doesn't require me to take lives. Today was supposed to be different. Today I was supposed to be the analyst, the support person, the one who contributes from the shadows without having to pull the trigger. Rodriguez felt a chill run down his spine. Ma'am, what are you saying? Elena turned back to him, and for the first time since he had known her, her carefully controlled mask had slipped. He could see pain in her eyes and exhaustion, and something else that might have been regret. I'm saying that some ghosts refuse to stay buried, Staff Sergeant. I'm saying that sometimes the past catches up with you, no matter how far you run or how hard you try to change. She sat back down at her desk, her fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. The official record will show that Echo Company successfully eliminated a high-value target through superior tactics and aggressive maneuvering. That's the story that will be told, and that's the story that will be believed. Everything else is just speculation. Rodriguez stood there for a long moment, trying to process what he had just heard. Elena had essentially confirmed his suspicions without actually admitting anything, had revealed her true nature while maintaining plausible deniability. It was a masterful performance, but it left him with more questions than answers. "Ma'am," he said finally, "whoever you are, whatever your background, I want you to know that my team is grateful. You saved lives today. That matters more than any official record." Elena looked up from her computer, and for just a moment, Rodriguez saw something that might have been gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant. That means more than you know." Rodriguez left the operations center with his mind racing, trying to piece together the fragments of Elena's story. He knew that there were classified programs, black operations, military units that didn't officially exist. He had heard rumors of female operators, elite soldiers who served in the shadows, their accomplishments never acknowledged, their sacrifices never recognized. Was Elena one of them? Had she been part of something that required this level of secrecy? Over the following days, Rodriguez began to pay closer attention to Elena's behavior, looking for clues that might confirm his suspicions. He noticed that she moved with the controlled grace of someone who had been through extensive combat training. He observed that she was always aware of her surroundings, always positioned herself with clear sightlines to exits, always seemed to know exactly where everyone else was positioned. These were the habits of someone who had lived in dangerous places, someone who had learned to trust no one completely and to always be ready for trouble. More importantly, Rodriguez began to notice that Elena's intelligence work was far more sophisticated than anything he had seen from other analysts. She didn't just compile reports. She created comprehensive threat assessments that demonstrated an understanding of tactics, terrain, and enemy psychology that could only come from extensive field experience. Her predictions were uncannily accurate. Her insights into enemy behavior were profound, and her ability to identify patterns in seemingly random data was nothing short of remarkable. But Elena maintained her cover with the same discipline she brought to everything else. She continued to work long hours in the operations center, continued to submit detailed reports, continued to interact with her colleagues with the same quiet professionalism that had characterized her from the beginning. If Rodriguez hadn't been looking for signs of deception, he might never have noticed the subtle tells that gave away her true nature. The breakthrough came a week later when Rodriguez was reviewing personnel files in preparation for another operation. He had been granted access to Elena's records as part of his mission planning responsibilities, and he was hoping to find some clue about her background that would explain her capabilities. What he found instead was a file that was remarkably thin, almost suspiciously so. Elena's official record showed a straightforward military career, naval academy, intelligence training, various assignments in analysis and assessment roles. But there were gaps, periods of time that were vaguely accounted for, assignments that seemed to have no clear purpose or outcome. More tellingly, there were no performance evaluations for certain periods, no fitness reports, no record of the kind of detailed documentation that the military typically maintained for all its personnel. Rodriguez had seen similar gaps before, in the records of personnel who had been assigned to classified programs or special operations units. The military had ways of hiding the service records of soldiers who had been involved in operations that couldn't be officially acknowledged. Elena's file had all the hallmarks of someone whose true service had been sanitized, whose real accomplishments had been carefully erased from the official record. But Rodriguez knew that records weren't the only place where information could be found. Military communities were small, and stories had a way of surviving even when official documentation was destroyed. He began to reach out to contacts in the special operations community, making discreet inquiries about female operators, elite units, classified programs that might have produced someone with Elena's capabilities. The response he received was frustrating and illuminating in equal measure. Everyone he spoke to had heard rumors, stories about female operators who served in the most dangerous missions, who possessed skills that rivaled the best male special operations personnel. But no one had specific information, no one could provide Names or units or details that would allow Rodriguez to piece together Elena's true story. What gradually emerged was a picture of a program that had existed on the margins of the military's official structure, a unit that had recruited women with exceptional capabilities and trained them for operations that required a different kind of approach than traditional special operations missions. These women had served in places where male operators couldn't go, had accomplished objectives that couldn't be achieved through conventional means, and had paid a price that was never officially acknowledged. Rodriguez began to understand that Elena's reticence wasn't just about maintaining operational security. It was about protecting herself from a past that had left deep scars. Whatever she had done, whatever she had seen, whatever she had lost, it had been significant enough that she had chosen to walk away from a career that had clearly defined her identity. The fact that she had requested assignment to an intelligence analysis role wasn't about avoiding danger. It was about avoiding the kind of moral compromises that had characterized her previous service. But understanding Elena's motivation didn't resolve Rodriguez's dilemma. He was responsible for the safety of his team, and he needed to know what kind of capabilities he could count on. If Elena was truly a former special operations soldier, then her skills could be invaluable in future missions. But if she was trying to put that life behind her, then pushing her to acknowledge her past could be both cruel and counterproductive. The decision was taken out of his hands when intelligence identified another high-value target operating in the same area. This time, the target was a weapons smuggler who had been supplying improvised explosive devices to insurgent groups throughout the region. The intelligence suggested that he was planning to move a large shipment of explosives, possibly including chemical weapons, to cells operating closer to major population centers. The mission would require the same kind of precision and coordination that had characterized the operation against the architect, but this time the stakes were potentially much higher. If the weapons shipment reached its destination, it could be used to carry out attacks that would kill hundreds of innocent civilians. Echo Company would once again be tasked with the operation, and once again, Elena would be assigned to provide intelligence support. Rodriguez found himself in the unusual position of hoping that Elena would once again step outside her official role to provide the kind of support that had been so crucial to their previous success. But he also knew that he couldn't explicitly ask her to do so. Elena had made it clear that she was trying to leave her past behind, and Rodriguez respected that choice, even if he didn't fully understand it. The pre-mission briefing was held in the base's main conference room, with representatives from intelligence, operations, and logistics, all providing input on the planned assault. Elena presented the intelligence assessment with her usual thoroughness, identifying the target's location, his security arrangements, and the most likely routes for the weapons shipment. Her analysis was comprehensive and professional, but Rodriguez noticed that she was even more subdued than usual, as if she was struggling with some internal conflict. After the briefing, Rodriguez approached Elena in the corridor outside the conference room. "Ma'am, can I speak with you privately?" Elena nodded, and they walked together toward the operations center, away from the crowd of personnel who were still discussing the mission details. When they were alone, Rodriguez turned to face her. "Ma'am, I want to be clear about something. I don't know what your background is, and I'm not going to ask you to tell me. But I want you to know that whatever capabilities you might have, whatever experience you might bring to this mission, my team would be honored to have your support." Elena stopped walking and looked at him with those storm gray eyes that seemed to see everything. "Staff Sergeant, I'm not sure what you're suggesting." "I'm suggesting that sometimes the mission is more important than personal preferences. I'm suggesting that sometimes we have to do things we'd rather not do because lives are at stake. And I'm suggesting that if you have the ability to help us succeed, then we need that help, regardless of what it might cost you personally." Elena was quiet for a long moment, her eyes focused on something beyond Rodriguez's shoulder. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Do you know what it's like to be really good at something that you hate? To have skills that you wish you'd never developed, abilities that you wish you could forget? Rodriguez shook his head. No, ma'am, I don't. I do, Elena said simply. I've spent the last 4 years trying to find a way to serve that doesn't require me to take lives. I've tried to convince myself that I could be useful in other ways, that I could contribute without having to become someone I don't want to be. But every time I think I've found a way forward, the past comes back to claim me. She looked directly at Rodriguez, and he could see the pain in her eyes. The truth is, Staff Sergeant, that I'm very good at killing people. I'm good at it in ways that most people can't imagine. And I'm good at it because I've had training that officially doesn't exist and experience that can never be acknowledged. I've served in places that aren't on any map, against enemies that don't appear in any intelligence briefing, under circumstances that would be unbelievable if they weren't classified beyond any level of disclosure. Rodriguez felt a chill run down his spine. Elena was finally telling him the truth, and it was more than he had expected. But I'm tired, Elena continued. I'm tired of being a weapon, tired of being deployed against targets, tired of carrying the weight of decisions that no one else wants to make. I came here because I thought I could be something different, contribute in a different way. I thought I could be the analyst, the support person, the one who helps from the shadows without having to pull the trigger. But yesterday changed. That, Rodriguez said. Elena nodded. Yesterday proved that I can't escape what I am. No matter how hard I try to be something else, when the moment comes, when lives are at stake, I revert to my training. I become the thing I've been trying to forget. Rodriguez stood there for a moment, trying to process what Elena had told him. He was beginning to understand that her reluctance wasn't about operational security or personal privacy. It was about a fundamental struggle with her own identity, a battle between who she had been and who she wanted to become. Ma'am, he said finally, I can't pretend to understand what you've been through. But I can tell you that what you did yesterday wasn't just about reverting to old training. It was about making a choice to save lives, to use your skills to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. That's not something to be ashamed of, Elena smiled sadly. You're a good man, Staff Sergeant, but you don't understand the full cost of what I do. Every life I take, every shot I fire, every mission I complete, it changes me a little bit more. It makes me a little bit less human, a little bit more like the weapon I was trained to be. I've been trying to find my way back to being a person instead of a tool, but I'm beginning to think that might not be possible. Rodriguez felt a surge of sympathy for this woman who had clearly paid a tremendous price for her service to her country. Ma'am, I think you're wrong about that. I think what happened yesterday proves that you're still a person, that you still care about right and wrong, that you still have a conscience. A weapon doesn't make moral choices. A weapon doesn't struggle with the consequences of its actions. A weapon doesn't try to find a better way to serve. Elena looked at him with something that might have been gratitude. Thank you for saying that, Staff Sergeant. I hope you're right. Rodriguez made his decision. Ma'am, I'm not going to ask you to do anything that goes against your conscience. But I will ask you to consider that sometimes the best way to save lives is to be willing to take them. The weapons convoy was scheduled to move at 0300 hours, under cover of darkness through a narrow mountain, pass that intelligence had identified as the most vulnerable point in the smugglers' network. The chemical weapons Elena had been tracking through intercepted communications represented a threat that went far beyond the usual improvised explosives and small arms that Echo Company typically encountered. These weapons could kill thousands if they reached their intended targets in populated areas. Elena spent the night before the mission in the operations center, analyzing satellite imagery and communication intercepts with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She had identified 17 possible routes the convoy could take, calculated travel times for each option, and cross-referenced them with known enemy positions and defensive capabilities. Her analysis was thorough to the point of being exhaustive. But Rodriguez suspected that her meticulous preparation was also a way of avoiding the larger question of what role she would play in the upcoming operation. The base was quieter at night, the usual bustle of activity reduced to essential personnel and security patrols. Elena worked alone in the operations center, surrounded by multiple monitors displaying maps, satellite feeds, and communication transcripts. She had developed a reputation for these late-night sessions, and most personnel had learned not to disturb her when she was deep in analysis mode. But tonight felt different, charged with a tension that seemed to permeate the entire facility. Major Harrison, the base intelligence officer, found Elena at her workstation just after midnight. He was a career intelligence professional, someone who had spent 2 decades analyzing threats and coordinating operations, and he had quickly recognized Elena's exceptional abilities. What he hadn't expected was to find her staring at a blank computer screen, her hands motionless on the keyboard, her expression distant and troubled. "Captain Vasquez," he said quietly, settling into a chair beside her workstation. "Everything all right?" Elena looked up, seeming to register his presence for the first time. "Sir, I was just reviewing the mission parameters one more time." Harrison glanced at her screens, noting that they displayed static images rather than the dynamic analysis he would have expected. "Find anything new?" Elena shook her head. "No, sir. The intelligence picture is as complete as we can make it. The convoy will travel through the Wadi al-Kusuf Pass sometime between 03:00 and 05:00 hours. Echo Company will be in position to intercept. The tactical situation is straightforward." Harrison studied her expression, noting the tension in her posture and the careful way she was choosing her words. "Captain, you've been working these intelligence problems for 3 weeks now, and your analysis has been exceptional. But tonight you seem distracted. Is there something about this mission that concerns you?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming silently on the desk. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. "Sir, the chemical weapons in that convoy represent a significant escalation in threat level. If they reach their intended targets, the casualties could number in the thousands. The mission parameters require us to stop that convoy at all costs." "That's correct," Harrison agreed. "Do you see a problem with the tactical plan?" Elena turned to face him, her storm-gray eyes reflecting an internal struggle that Harrison couldn't quite identify. "Sir, the plan calls for Echo Company to establish blocking positions at both ends of the pass and wait for the convoy to enter the kill zone. It's a sound tactical approach, but it assumes that the enemy will cooperate by following our predictions." Harrison nodded. "Intelligence is never perfect, Captain. We make the best assessments we can with the information available. But what if we're wrong?" Elena asked. "What if the convoy takes a different route? What if they've identified our positions? What if they have capabilities we haven't accounted for?" "The margin for error on this mission is essentially zero." Harrison was beginning to understand Elena's concern. She wasn't questioning the intelligence or the tactical plan. She was struggling with the weight of responsibility that came with knowing that failure could result in mass casualties. It was the kind of pressure that could break even experienced operators, and Elena was supposedly just an intelligence analyst. "Captain," Harrison said carefully, "you've provided the best intelligence assessment possible. That's your job, and you've done it exceptionally well. The tactical execution is Echo Company's responsibility. You can't control every variable." Elena looked back at her screens, where satellite images showed the barren landscape where tomorrow's operation would unfold. "Sir, what if I could?" Harrison felt a chill run down his spine. There was something in Elena's tone, a quiet certainty that suggested capabilities far beyond those of a typical intelligence officer. "What do you mean?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, seeming to weigh her words carefully. Sir, what if there was a way to guarantee mission success? What if there was someone who could provide overwatch? Someone who could eliminate threats that Echo Company couldn't handle? Someone who could ensure that the chemical weapons never reached their destination? Harrison studied her face, noting the tension in her jaw and the way her hands had unconsciously clenched into fists. Captain, are you suggesting that you have capabilities that aren't reflected in your official records? Elena met his gaze directly. Sir, I'm suggesting that sometimes the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure comes down to being willing to do whatever is necessary to protect innocent lives. Harrison leaned back in his chair, trying to process what Elena was telling him. He had suspected that there was more to her background than her personnel file indicated, but this was the first time she had come close to acknowledging hidden capabilities. Captain, if you have specialized training or experience that could contribute to this mission, then I need to know about it. Elena stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the base perimeter where guards walked their posts under harsh security lights. The desert stretched away into darkness, hostile and unforgiving, full of dangers that most people couldn't imagine. When she turned back to Harrison, there was something different in her expression, a hardness that hadn't been there before. Sir, there are programs that don't officially exist, units that never appear in any organizational chart, operations that are never acknowledged by any government agency. People who serve in these programs learn skills that go far beyond conventional military training. They learn to operate alone, in hostile territory, against overwhelming odds. They learn to make decisions that no one else wants to make, to carry out missions that no one else can complete. Harrison felt his pulse quicken. Elena was describing exactly the kind of classified special operations programs that existed on the margins of official military structure. Captain, are you telling me that you've been part of such a program? Elena walked back to her desk and opened a locked drawer, removing a small leather folder that Harrison had never seen before. Inside the folder was a photograph that made his blood run cold. It showed Elena in military fatigues, but not the standard uniform of any branch he recognized. She was standing with 7 other women, all carrying weapons that suggested specialized training and elite status. The background showed mountainous terrain that could have been Afghanistan or Pakistan, or any number of hostile environments where American forces operated in the shadows. Gray Fox, Elena said quietly. Officially, it never existed. Unofficially, it was a deep reconnaissance unit tasked with operations that required a different approach than traditional special operations. Female operators working alone or in small teams in environments where male soldiers couldn't go. We operated without support, without backup, without any official acknowledgement of our existence. Harrison stared at the photograph, trying to process what he was seeing. The women in the image looked like any group of soldiers, but there was something in their eyes, a hardness and confidence that spoke of extensive combat experience. Elena was in the center of the group, younger than she was now, but with the same distant expression he had come to recognize. What happened to the unit? Harrison asked. Elena's expression darkened. Political scandal. One of our operations was compromised, became public, created problems for people in Washington who needed plausible deniability. Gray Fox was disbanded, its members scattered to conventional assignments, its records sanitized or destroyed. Officially, we never existed, so officially, we could never be acknowledged or honored for our service. Harrison looked at the other faces in the photograph. What happened to the others? Elena was quiet for a long moment. Some found their way to other special operations units. Some left the military entirely. Some couldn't handle the transition back to normal life. She paused, her voice becoming even quieter. Some didn't survive long enough to find out. Harrison began to understand the weight Elena had been carrying. She wasn't just a former special operations soldier. She was a survivor of a unit that had been sacrificed for political convenience, a soldier whose service could never be officially acknowledged or honored. "Captain, I'm sorry, I had no idea." Elena shrugged, but Harrison could see the pain in her eyes. "It's ancient history, sir. What matters now is the mission tomorrow. Those chemical weapons cannot be allowed to reach their destination." Harrison studied her face, noting the determination in her expression and the way her posture had changed. Elena wasn't just offering to help. She was preparing to do whatever was necessary to ensure mission success, regardless of personal cost. "Captain, what exactly are you proposing?" Elena moved to a detailed topographical map of the operational area that covered one wall of the operations center. Her finger traced the mountain pass where the convoy would travel, highlighting key terrain features and potential positions. Echo Company will establish blocking positions here and here, creating a kill zone in the center of the pass. It's a good plan, but it assumes that the convoy will cooperate by entering the trap. She pointed to a series of ridgelines that overlooked the pass from multiple directions. Someone positioned here would have overwatch on the entire operational area. They could provide early warning if the convoy deviates from expected routes, eliminate key threats that Echo Company couldn't engage, and ensure that no vehicles escape the kill zone. Harrison studied the map, noting the distances involved and the challenging terrain. "Captain, those positions are over a kilometer from the convoy route. The shots you're talking about would be extremely difficult under ideal conditions, impossible under combat stress." Elena looked at him with those storm-gray eyes that seemed to see everything. "Sir, I've made shots like that before, in places that don't appear on any map, against targets that were never officially acknowledged. The distance isn't the problem. The problem is being willing to cross a line that I've been trying to avoid crossing." Harrison was beginning to understand Elena's internal struggle. She wasn't questioning her ability to contribute to the mission. She was struggling with the decision to return to a role that she had deliberately abandoned. "Captain, if you have capabilities that could prevent a chemical weapons attack, then I think you have a moral obligation to use them." Elena smiled. "Sadly, sir, with respect, you don't understand the full cost of what you're asking. Every time I pick up a rifle in anger, every time I take a life, every time I become the weapon I was trained to be, it changes me a little bit more. I've been trying to find my way back to being a person instead of a tool, but missions like this make that almost impossible." Harrison felt a surge of sympathy for this woman who had clearly paid a tremendous price for her service. "Captain, I can't pretend to understand what you've been through, but I can tell you that sometimes we have to do things we'd rather not do because the alternative is unacceptable. If those chemical weapons reach their targets, thousands of innocent people will die." Elena nodded slowly. "I understand that, sir. And I understand that I'm probably the only person in this theater who has the capability to guarantee mission success. But I need you to understand something as well. If I do this, if I take on the role you're asking me to take, then I'm not sure I'll be able to find my way back to who I'm trying to become." Harrison studied her face, seeing the conflict between her sense of duty and her desire to escape her past. "Captain, what if I told you that this could be the last time? What if I promised that after this mission, we would respect your desire to serve in a non-combat role?" Elena laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Sir, with respect, you can't make that promise. Tomorrow there will be another mission, another crisis, another situation where my specialized skills could make the difference between success and failure. Once people know what I'm capable of, they'll never stop asking me to do it." Harrison realized that Elena was right. Once her true capabilities were known, she would inevitably be called upon to use them again and again. The military didn't waste assets, especially assets as rare and valuable as a former Gray Fox operator. "Captain, I wish I could offer you guarantees, but you're right that I can't. All I can offer is the knowledge that you'll be saving lives, that your sacrifice will prevent a tragedy that could affect thousands of innocent people." Elena walked back to the window, staring out at the desert landscape that would soon become a battlefield. When she turned back to Harrison, her expression had hardened into something that was both determined and resigned. "Sir, I'll do it. I'll provide overwatch for the mission. But I want it understood that this is a one-time exception, not a return to my previous role." Harrison nodded, though he suspected that Elena's involvement in tomorrow's mission would make it impossible for her to maintain her cover as a simple intelligence analyst. "Understood. Captain, what do you need from me?" Elena moved to a secure communications terminal and began typing rapidly. "I need access to the base armory, specifically the precision weapons locker. I need transportation to the operational area before Echo Company moves out. And I need a guarantee that my involvement in the mission will not appear in any official reports." Harrison watched her work, noting the efficiency and precision with which she accessed classified systems and pulled up detailed equipment inventories. This wasn't the behavior of someone making a reluctant decision. This was the behavior of someone falling back into familiar patterns, someone who was more comfortable in the role of operator than she wanted to admit. "Captain," Harrison said carefully, "are you sure about this?" Elena looked up from the terminal, her expression unreadable. "Sir, I stopped being sure about anything the day my unit was disbanded and my teammates were scattered to the winds. But I am certain that those chemical weapons cannot be allowed to reach their destination, and I'm the person best qualified to prevent that from happening." Harrison left the operations center with his mind racing, trying to process what he had just learned about Elena's background and what it meant for tomorrow's mission. He had always suspected that there were classified programs operating in the shadows of America's military structure, but he had never expected to encounter one of their products directly. Elena represented capabilities that went far beyond anything reflected in the unit's official roster. But harnessing those capabilities meant asking her to sacrifice the new identity she had been trying to build. The pre-mission briefing was held at 0200 hours, with Echo Company assembled in the base's main conference room. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez noticed immediately that Elena wasn't present, which was unusual given her role in developing the intelligence picture for the operation. Major Harrison conducted the briefing himself, walking the team through the convoy route, timing estimates and tactical considerations with the thoroughness that such a critical mission demanded. "The convoy consists of 3 vehicles," Harrison explained, pointing to satellite images displayed on the briefing room's main screen. "Intelligence suggests that the chemical weapons are being transported in a modified cargo truck, escorted by 2 technicals equipped with heavy machine guns. The entire package is being guided by a bomb maker known as the Engineer, who has been responsible for several previous attacks in the region." Rodriguez studied the images, noting the challenging terrain and limited approaches to the target area. "Sir, what about air support? Can we count on close air support if things go wrong?" Harrison shook his head. "Weather conditions will prevent effective air operations during the window when the convoy is expected to move. Echo Company will be on its own for this one." The room fell silent as the Marines processed this information. Operating without air support in hostile territory was always dangerous, but the stakes of this particular mission made failure unacceptable. Rodriguez felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders, the knowledge that his decisions would determine whether his team came home alive. "Sir," Rodriguez said, "what about intelligence support? Will Captain Vasquez be monitoring communications during the operation?" Harrison paused, choosing his words carefully. "Captain Vasquez will be providing specialized support for this mission, but not from the operations center. She'll be deployed to an overwatch position where she can provide real-time intelligence and communications relay." Rodriguez felt a chill run down his spine. Harrison's careful phrasing suggested that Elena's role in the mission would go beyond passive intelligence gathering. "Sir, is Captain Vasquez qualified for field deployment in hostile territory?" Harrison met Rodriguez's gaze directly. "Staff. Sergeant, Captain Vasquez has specialized training that makes her uniquely qualified to provide the kind of support this mission requires. I can't give you details, but I can assure you that she's capable of taking care of herself." Rodriguez wanted to press for more information, but he recognized the tone that indicated classified material. Elena's background was apparently more complex than anyone had suspected, and tomorrow's mission would likely provide answers to questions that had been troubling him since the operation against the architect. Echo Company moved out at 0230 hours, traveling in modified Humvees that had been stripped down for speed and silence. The mountain pass where they would intercept the convoy was 30 kilometers from the base, accessible only by rough terrain that would challenge both vehicles and personnel. Rodriguez had positioned his most experienced Marines in the lead vehicle, with newer personnel in supporting roles where they could contribute without being exposed to the highest levels of risk. Elena had left the base an hour earlier, traveling alone in a vehicle that Rodriguez didn't recognize. She had exchanged her standard intelligence analyst gear for combat equipment that looked both familiar and somehow different from standard military issue. Her rifle was the same modified M4 she had carried on previous missions, but Rodriguez noticed that she had added additional equipment that suggested a precision shooting role rather than general infantry support. The convoy route wound through mountainous terrain that provided excellent concealment, but also created numerous tactical challenges. The pass itself was a natural choke point, with steep walls on both sides and limited options for escape or evasion. Intelligence suggested that the enemy convoy would enter the pass from the north and travel south toward the border, making the timing of the intercept critical to mission success. Rodriguez positioned his team according to the plan developed. During the pre-mission briefing, 2 Marines with anti-tank weapons would cover the northern approach, preventing the convoy from retreating back the way it had come. 2 more would block the southern exit, ensuring that no vehicles could escape toward the border. The remaining members of Echo Company would provide supporting fire from concealed positions along the eastern wall of the pass. But as Rodriguez settled into his position and began the long wait for the convoy's arrival, he found himself wondering where Elena had gone and what role she would play in the upcoming engagement. Harrison's briefing had been deliberately vague about her position and responsibilities, suggesting that her involvement was more significant than anyone was willing to acknowledge officially. Elena had indeed positioned herself in a location that provided overwatch on the entire operational area, but her vantage point was over 1,500 meters from the convoy route. She had climbed to a rocky promontory that offered clear sight lines in multiple directions while providing concealment from observation or counter-sniper fire. The position was tactically perfect, but it required shooting skills that went far beyond anything expected of a typical intelligence officer. Through her scope, Elena could see Echo Company's positions clearly, noting their fields of fire and potential vulnerabilities. Rodriguez had done an excellent job with the tactical setup, but Elena could also see weaknesses in the plan that would become critical if the enemy failed to cooperate with their expectations. The convoy could take several different approaches to the pass, some of which would allow them to engage Echo Company from unexpected directions. More importantly, Elena's elevated position allowed her to see terrain features that weren't visible from ground level. There were secondary routes that the convoy could use to bypass the main pass entirely, paths that would allow them to avoid the trap that Echo Company had so carefully prepared. If the enemy had conducted proper reconnaissance, they might already know about the ambush and be planning to take one of these alternate routes. Elena had positioned herself not just to provide overwatch for Echo Company, but to cover the approaches that conventional forces couldn't monitor. Her mission wasn't just to support the planned ambush. It was to ensure that the chemical weapons convoy didn't escape, regardless of what route they chose or what tactical adjustments they made in response to unexpected resistance. At 0347 hours, Elena's communications equipment crackled with the first report of enemy movement. A patrol element had spotted vehicle headlights moving along the expected approach route, still several kilometers from the ambush site, but clearly heading in the direction of the pass. The convoy was moving faster than intelligence had predicted, which meant that timing would be even more critical to mission success. Elena tracked the approaching vehicles through her scope, counting 3 sets of headlights that matched intelligence estimates for the convoy composition. But as the vehicles drew closer, she began to notice details that troubled her. The convoy was maintaining proper spacing and speed for a tactical movement, suggesting professional military training rather than the improvised approach typical of insurgent groups. More concerning, the vehicles were varying their speed and route in ways that suggested counter-surveillance awareness. Through her earpiece, Elena could hear Rodriguez coordinating his team's final preparations. Echo Company was ready for the intercept, their weapons trained on the kill zone, their anti-tank systems prepared to engage the convoy vehicles. But Elena was beginning to suspect that the enemy was more sophisticated than anyone had anticipated. Her suspicions were confirmed when the convoy suddenly stopped approximately 2 kilometers from the pass entrance. Through her scope, Elena could see figures dismounting from the vehicles and moving forward on foot, apparently conducting a reconnaissance of the route ahead. This wasn't the behavior of a routine smuggling operation. This was the careful tactical approach of a professional military unit. Elena keyed her radio, speaking in the calm, professional tone that had characterized her previous communications. Echo Actual, this is Overwatch. Be advised, the convoy has stopped short of the pass and is conducting foot reconnaissance. They may be aware of your positions. Rodriguez's voice crackled back immediately. Overwatch, this is Echo Actual. Can you identify the reconnaissance element? Elena adjusted her scope, studying the figures moving through the darkness below. Echo Actual, I count 4 personnel conducting the reconnaissance. They're moving in tactical formation and using night vision equipment. This is not a civilian smuggling operation. Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. If the convoy was being escorted by professional soldiers rather than typical insurgents, then Echo Company was facing a much more dangerous opponent than anyone had anticipated. Professional soldiers would have better equipment, superior training, and the tactical knowledge to turn the ambush around on the Americans. Overwatch, Rodriguez transmitted. What are your recommendations? Elena studied the tactical situation through her scope, noting the positions of both the reconnaissance team and the main convoy. The enemy had stopped just outside the effective range of Echo Company's weapons, but they were well within range of her position. She could eliminate the reconnaissance team, but doing so would alert the main convoy and potentially cause them to abort the mission or take an alternate route. Echo Actual, I can eliminate the reconnaissance element, but that will compromise the ambush. Alternatively, we can wait and see if they proceed into the kill zone. But there's a significant risk that they'll identify your positions and either withdraw or attempt to flank your location. Rodriguez was faced with a tactical dilemma that had no perfect solution. Allowing the reconnaissance to continue risked compromise of his positions, but eliminating them prematurely might cause the convoy to escape with the chemical weapons. The decision he made in the next few minutes could determine whether thousands of innocent civilians lived or died. Overwatch, stand by. Let me assess the situation. Elena watched through her scope as the enemy reconnaissance team continued their careful advance toward the pass. They were moving with the kind of professional competence that suggested extensive military training, possibly including experience fighting American forces. These weren't insurgents or terrorists. They were soldiers, and they would be far more dangerous in a direct engagement. Through her earpiece, Elena could hear Rodriguez coordinating with his team, assessing their options, and trying to develop a course of action that would ensure mission success. But Elena was beginning to realize that conventional tactics weren't going to be sufficient for this situation. The enemy was too professional, too careful, too well-equipped to fall into a straightforward ambush. Elena made her decision. Echo. Actual, this is Overwatch. I'm going to eliminate the reconnaissance team. When I do, the convoy will know they're under attack. Be prepared for immediate engagement from multiple directions. Rodriguez felt a surge of both relief and apprehension. Elena's intervention would solve the immediate tactical problem, but it would also expose capabilities that were supposed to remain hidden. Once she opened fire, there would be no more pretending that she was just an intelligence analyst along for the ride. Overwatch, Echo Actual copies. We're ready for immediate engagement. Elena settled into her shooting position, her breathing controlled and steady, her mind focused on the mechanical precision required for extreme-range precision shooting. The reconnaissance team was moving in a tactical formation that would allow her to engage multiple targets in rapid succession, but the shots would have to be perfect. Any miss would alert the enemy and potentially compromise the entire mission. The first shot eliminated the team leader, who had been moving slightly ahead of the others and using a handheld GPS device to coordinate their movement. The second and third shots took out the flanking elements before they could react to the loss of their leader. The fourth shot eliminated the communications specialist before he could transmit a warning to the main convoy. The entire engagement lasted less than 10 seconds. 4 shots fired with surgical precision that eliminated the reconnaissance threat without giving the enemy any opportunity to respond. But Elena knew that her work was far from finished. Main convoy would be expecting their reconnaissance team to report in, and when that report didn't come, they would know that they were walking into a trap. Elena was right. Within minutes of the reconnaissance team's elimination, the convoy began to move again, but not toward the pass as intelligence had predicted. Instead, the vehicles split up, with one heading toward a secondary route that would bypass the ambush entirely, while the other two continued toward the pass, but at a much higher rate of speed. Echo Actual, this is Overwatch. The convoy has split up. One vehicle is heading for the bypass route. 2 vehicles are approaching the pass at high speed. You're going to have multiple contacts from different directions. Rodriguez felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied combat engagement. The tactical situation had become far more complex than anyone had anticipated, but Elena's warning gave him the information he needed to adjust his plans. Echo elements, this is Echo Actual. We have multiple contacts approaching from different directions. Team Alpha, shift to cover the bypass route. Team Bravo, prepare for high-speed engagement in the main pass. But even as Rodriguez was adjusting his positions, Elena was tracking the vehicle that was attempting to use the bypass route. This was the most dangerous threat, because if it escaped with the chemical weapons, the entire mission would be a failure regardless of what happened to the other vehicles. The bypass route took the vehicle outside the effective range of Echo Company's weapons, but it was still within range of Elena's position. Elena tracked the escaping vehicle through her scope, calculating lead time and bullet drop for a target. Moving at approximately 60 kilometers per hour across rough terrain. It was an extraordinarily difficult shot, requiring her to predict where the vehicle would be when the bullet arrived, while accounting for multiple variables that could affect the trajectory. The shot, when it came, was perfect. The bullet struck the vehicle's engine block, causing it to lose power and coast to a stop in a position where it was vulnerable to follow-up fire. Elena's second shot eliminated the driver, and her third shot ignited the fuel tank, ensuring that whatever cargo the vehicle carried would be destroyed rather than recovered by enemy forces. Meanwhile, in the main pass, Echo Company was engaging the 2 remaining vehicles with devastating effect. Rodriguez's careful positioning and preparation paid off as anti-tank rockets eliminated both vehicles within seconds of their entry into the kill zone. But Elena could see through her scope that some of the occupants had survived the initial engagement and were attempting to escape on foot. These weren't typical insurgents. They were moving with the tactical discipline of professional soldiers, using available cover effectively and attempting to establish fields of fire that would allow them to engage Echo Company's positions. Elena realized that the engagement was far from over, and that Rodriguez's team was about to face a more dangerous opponent than they had anticipated. Elena began engaging the surviving enemy soldiers with methodical precision, each shot carefully planned and perfectly executed. Her elevated position allowed her to track targets that were invisible to Echo Company, and her precision shooting eliminated threats before they could engage Rodriguez's Marines. Within minutes, the pass fell silent, all enemy resistance eliminated. Echo Actual, this is Overwatch. All targets neutralized. The area is secure. Rodriguez felt a surge of relief mixed with amazement. Elena's intervention had transformed what could have been a disastrous engagement into a complete tactical success. Not only had Echo Company achieved their primary objective of stopping the chemical weapons convoy, but they had done so without suffering any casualties. But Rodriguez also realized that Elena's performance had definitively answered any questions about her background and capabilities. The precision shooting she had displayed, the tactical awareness she had demonstrated, and the calm professionalism with which she had coordinated the engagement were far beyond anything expected of an intelligence analyst. Elena was clearly a former special operations soldier, and her skills were among the best Rodriguez had ever encountered. The extraction went smoothly, with Echo Company collecting intelligence materials from the destroyed vehicles and confirming that the chemical weapons had been successfully neutralized. Elena had already vacated her Overwatch position by the time Rodriguez's team reached the area, melting away into the landscape with the same invisibility that had characterized her. Arrival. Back at the base, the after-action briefing was conducted with the same professional thoroughness that characterized all of Echo Company's operations. But Rodriguez noticed that Elena's role in the mission was described in deliberately vague terms, with no specific mention of her precision shooting or tactical contributions. Officially, the mission had been a success due to superior tactics and aggressive execution by Echo Company. Elena submitted her intelligence report with the same quiet professionalism she brought to all her duties, making no mention of her direct participation in the engagement. As far as the official record was concerned, she had provided analytical support from a remote observation post, contributing to mission success through superior intelligence preparation and real-time situational awareness. But Rodriguez knew the truth, and he suspected that Elena's secret was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Word was already spreading through the base about the mysterious sniper who had provided support for Echo Company's missions, and speculation was growing about the identity and background of this phantom operator. Elena's carefully constructed cover was beginning to unravel, and Rodriguez wondered how long she could maintain the pretense of being just another intelligence analyst. The answer came sooner than anyone expected when Major Harrison called Elena into his office the following morning for a private conversation that would force her to confront the contradiction between who she was trying to become and who she had always been. The time for maintaining her cover was rapidly running out, and Elena would soon have to decide whether to reveal her true identity or find some other way to continue serving without compromising the new life she had been trying to build. Major Harrison's office was spartanly furnished, containing only the essential items required for his duties as base intelligence officer. Elena sat across from his desk, her posture erect and professional, but Harrison could sense the tension radiating from her like heat from a forge. The morning sun streamed through the single window, casting harsh shadows that seemed to emphasize the gravity of their conversation. Captain Vasquez, Harrison began, setting down a thick manila folder that Alina recognized as her personnel file. We need to discuss your future here at Alhasaka. Elena remained silent, her storm gray eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond Harrison's shoulder. She had been expecting this conversation since the moment she fired her first shot during the chemical weapons interdiction mission. There was no way to maintain her cover as a simple intelligence analyst after demonstrating the kind of capabilities she had displayed over the past week. Harrison opened the folder and began leafing through documents that Elena knew contained only a carefully sanitized version of her military service. Your official record shows a competent intelligence officer with solid analytical skills and appropriate security clearances. But your recent performance in the field suggests capabilities that go far beyond anything reflected in these files. Elena finally met his gaze. Sir, I've performed my duties according to the mission requirements and my training. Harrison smiled grimly. Captain, let's dispense with the fiction. The precision shooting you've displayed, the tactical awareness you've demonstrated, and the operational planning skills you've exhibited are not the products of standard intelligence training. You're a former special operations soldier, and from what I've observed, you're among the best I've ever encountered. Elena shifted slightly in her chair, a movement so subtle that most people wouldn't have noticed it. But Harrison had learned to read the small signs that indicated stress or discomfort in experienced operators. Sir, I'm not sure what you're implying. Harrison leaned forward, his expression serious. Captain, I'm not implying anything. I'm stating directly that you've been operating under false pretenses since your arrival at this base. Your intelligence analyst cover may fool most people, but it doesn't fool me. The question is, what do we do about it? Elena was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options and calculating the potential consequences of different responses. She had known that this moment would come eventually, but she had hoped to have more time to establish herself in her new role before her past caught up with her. Sir, what exactly are you asking me? Harrison closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. I'm asking you to tell me the truth about who you are and what your real capabilities are. I'm asking you to trust me with information that could be crucial to future operations and the safety of personnel under my command. Elena studied Harrison's face, looking for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. She had learned long ago to be suspicious of authority figures who claimed to have her best interests at heart. But Harrison seemed genuinely concerned about her welfare and the welfare of his unit. Sir, there are some stories that are better left untold. Some capabilities that are better left unacknowledged. Some pasts that are better left buried. Harrison nodded slowly. I understand that, Captain. But recent events have made it clear that your particular skills may be essential to future operations. The threats we're facing in this theater are evolving, becoming more sophisticated and more dangerous. We need every advantage we can get, and you represent a significant advantage. Elena felt a familiar weight settling on her shoulders, the burden of expectations and responsibilities that she had been trying to escape. Sir, I came here because I wanted to serve in a different capacity. I wanted to contribute to the mission, without having to become someone I'm trying not to be anymore. Harrison's expression softened slightly. Captain, I respect that desire, and I understand why you might want to leave certain aspects of your past behind. But sometimes circumstances don't allow us the luxury of choosing who we want to be. Sometimes we have to be who we are, regardless of our personal preferences. Elena stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the base perimeter where guards continued their eternal vigilance against threats that could materialize at any moment. The desert stretched away toward horizons that held dangers she understood better than most people could imagine. Sir, do you know what it's like to be really good at something that changes you every time you do it? To have skills that are so specialized, so particular, that using them makes you less human and more like a weapon? Harrison remained seated, but his voice carried a sympathy that Elena hadn't expected. "No, Captain, I don't. But I can see that it's a burden you've been carrying for a long time." Elena turned back to face him, and for the first time since Harrison had known her, her carefully controlled mask had slipped completely. He could see pain in her eyes, and exhaustion, and something that might have been desperation. "Sir, I was part of a program called Gray Fox. We operated in places that don't appear on any map, against targets that were never officially acknowledged, under circumstances that would be unbelievable if they weren't classified beyond any reasonable level of disclosure. We were ghosts, shadows, weapons that could be deployed, and then denied if anything went wrong." Harrison felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard rumors of such programs, whispers about elite female operators who served in the darkest corners of America's global conflicts, but he had never expected to encounter one directly. 8 of us went into Kandahar province on a mission that was supposed to last 72 hours. We were tasked with eliminating a target who had been responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces throughout the region. Intelligence suggested that he was meeting with senior Taliban leadership to plan a major offensive. Elena's voice became distant, as if she was reliving events that had happened in another lifetime. The intelligence was wrong. It wasn't a meeting. It was a trap. Someone had compromised our mission, sold us out to the enemy. We walked into an ambush that had been specifically designed to eliminate American Special Operations personnel. Harrison remained silent, sensing that Elena was finally telling a story that she had never shared with anyone before. The engagement lasted 14 hours. We were outnumbered approximately 30-1, fighting in terrain that the enemy knew better than we did, without support and without any possibility of extraction. One by one, my teammates fell. Sarah Martinez, 24 years old, from Texas. Jessica Chun, 26, from California. Amanda Rodriguez, 23, from New Mexico. Elena's voice began to break as she recited the names, and Harrison realized that she was honoring fallen comrades whose deaths had never been officially acknowledged. "I watched them die, sir. I watched them fight with courage and skill that should have been celebrated in history books, but instead will never be mentioned in any official record. They died serving their country in a mission that officially never happened, against enemies that officially didn't exist, in a place that officially we were never supposed to be." Harrison felt a profound sadness for this woman who had clearly suffered losses that most people couldn't comprehend. "Captain, how did you survive?" Elena walked back to her chair but didn't sit down. "I survived because I was willing to become something that my teammates weren't. I survived because I was willing to cross lines that they couldn't cross, to do things that they wouldn't do, to become a weapon instead of a soldier." She paused, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I killed 47 enemy fighters. During that engagement, sir. I killed them with precision and efficiency that surprised even me. I became something that wasn't quite human anymore, something that existed only to eliminate threats and ensure survival. And when it was over, when the extraction team finally found me 3 days later, I realized that I had lost something fundamental about who I was." Harrison was beginning to understand the depth of Elena's trauma and the complexity of her relationship with her own capabilities. "Captain, you survived an impossible situation. You should be proud of that." Elena shook her head. "Sir, survival isn't something to be proud of when it requires you to become something monstrous. I survived because I was willing to be more ruthless, more violent, more inhuman than the people trying to kill me. That's not heroism. That's just a different kind of damnation." Harrison stood up and moved around his desk, positioning himself closer to Elena, but careful not to invade her personal space. "Captain, you're being too hard on yourself. You did what was necessary to survive in an impossible situation. That doesn't make you a monster. It makes you a survivor." Elena looked at him with eyes that held depths of pain Harrison couldn't fathom. Sir, after Kandahar, Grey Fox was disbanded. The mission had been compromised, questions were being asked, and the program became politically inconvenient. We were scattered to conventional assignments, our records sanitized, our service hidden behind classifications that will never be lifted. She paused, her voice becoming even quieter. I requested assignment to intelligence analysis because I thought I could serve without having to kill anymore. I thought I could contribute to the mission without having to become the weapon I had been trained to be. I thought I could find some measure of peace. Harrison was beginning to understand why Elena had been so reluctant to acknowledge her true capabilities. She wasn't just hiding her past. She was trying to escape it, to build a new identity that didn't require her to be a killer. Captain, what happened during the missions with Echo Company? Elena smiled sadly. What happened was that I discovered I can't escape what I am. No matter how hard I try to be something different, when the moment comes, when lives are at stake, I revert to my training. I become the thing I've been trying to forget. Harrison studied her expression, noting the conflict between her desire to serve and her need to preserve what remained of her humanity. Captain, the capabilities you demonstrated saved lives. That has to count for something. Elena nodded slowly. It does, sir. But it also proves that I can't maintain the fiction of being a simple intelligence analyst. People are starting to ask questions, and sooner or later, someone is going to dig deep enough to find answers I'm not prepared to give. Harrison returned to his chair, his mind racing as he tried to develop a solution that would allow Elena to continue serving while protecting her from the kind of scrutiny that could compromise her carefully constructed new identity. Captain, what if I told you that I could arrange for your transfer to a position where your specialized skills would be valued, but where you could also maintain some measure of anonymity? Elena studied his face, looking for any sign of deception. What kind of position? Harrison opened a different folder, one that Elena hadn't seen before. There's a joint task force being formed to address emerging threats in this theater. It's a multinational organization with personnel drawn from various special operations communities. They need someone with your particular combination of skills and experience. Elena felt a familiar weight settling on her shoulders. Sir, that sounds like exactly the kind of assignment I've been trying to avoid. Harrison nodded. I understand that. But it would also give you the opportunity to work with people who understand your background, who wouldn't ask uncomfortable questions about your capabilities, and who would value your contributions without requiring you to compromise your cover. Elena was quiet for a long moment, weighing the advantages and disadvantages of Harrison's proposal. On one hand, joining a special operations task force would mean returning to the kind of work she had been trying to escape. On the other hand, it would allow her to serve without having to maintain the increasingly difficult pretense of being someone she wasn't. Sir, what about my desire to serve in a non-combat role? Harrison's expression was sympathetic but realistic. Captain, I think recent events have proven that you can't completely separate yourself from combat operations. Your skills are too valuable, and the threats we're facing are too serious. But a task force assignment would give you more control over when and how you use those skills. Elena walked back to the window, staring out at the desert landscape that had become both familiar and alien during her time at Al-Hasika. She had come here seeking anonymity and peace, but instead she had found that her past was inescapable, and her skills were too valuable to be wasted on routine intelligence analysis. Sir, if I accept this assignment, what guarantees do I have? That I won't just be deployed as a weapon again? Harrison stood up and joined her at the window. Captain, I can't give you guarantees about anything in this business. But I can tell you that the task force operates with a high degree of autonomy, and that its members have significant input into mission planning and execution. You would have more control over your destiny than you've had in any previous assignment. Elena was quiet for several minutes. staring out at the horizon where heat waves created shimmering mirages that made distant objects appear closer than they actually were. When she finally spoke, her voice was resigned but determined. "Sir, I'll consider the assignment, but I need some time to think about it, and I need some assurances about how my previous service will be handled." Harrison nodded. "Of course, take all the time you need. And I can assure you that your Gray Fox service will remain classified at the highest levels. Only personnel with absolute need to know will have access to that information." Elena turned away from the window and faced Harrison directly. "Sir, there's something else you need to understand. If I accept this assignment, if I return to operational status, then Elena Vasquez, the intelligence analyst, ceases to exist. I would be returning to a life that I've been trying to escape, and I'm not sure I can do that without losing what's left of my humanity." Harrison felt a profound sympathy for this woman who had clearly paid a tremendous price for her service to her country. "Captain, what if I told you that you could serve in a way that actually helps you preserve your humanity? What if the mission of this task force was specifically focused on protecting innocent civilians and preventing the kind of tragedies that you've spent your career trying to stop?" Elena studied his face, looking for any sign that he was simply telling her what she wanted to hear. "Sir, what exactly does this task force do?" Harrison opened the folder he had been holding and removed a classified briefing document. "It's called Task Force Sanctuary. Their mission is to identify and eliminate threats to civilian populations in conflict zones. They operate under rules of engagement that prioritize the protection of non-combatants, and their success is measured not by enemy casualties, but by lives saved." Elena felt a spark of interest despite her reservations. "Sir, that sounds almost too good to be true." Harrison smiled slightly. "It's not perfect, Captain. There would still be missions that require you to take lives. But those lives would be taken in service of protecting innocent people, and the missions would be planned and executed with the specific goal of minimizing collateral damage and civilian casualties." Elena was quiet for a long moment, considering the possibility that she might be able to find a way to serve that aligned with her desire to protect rather than simply destroy. "Sir, who else is part of this task force?" Harrison consulted the briefing document. "Personnel from British SAS, Canadian JTF-2, Australian SASR, and selected American Special Operations units. All of them have been chosen for their combination of tactical skills and demonstrated commitment to protecting civilian populations." Elena felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. The possibility of working with people who shared her values and understood her motivations was appealing in a way that she hadn't expected. "Sir, what would my role be in this task force?" Harrison looked directly at her. "Captain, you would be the precision shooter. Your job would be to eliminate threats that conventional forces can't handle, to provide overwatch for rescue operations, and to ensure that humanitarian missions can be completed without interference from hostile forces." Elena realized that Harrison was essentially offering her the opportunity to become a guardian angel, someone who could use her deadly skills to protect innocent people rather than simply eliminating enemies. It was a role that could give meaning to capabilities that had often felt like a curse. "Sir, I need to know more about the command structure and the decision-making process. I won't accept an assignment where I'm just a weapon to be pointed at targets by people who don't understand the consequences of what they're asking me to do." Harrison nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of question I would expect from someone with your experience. Task Force Sanctuary operates with a flat command structure. Mission planning is collaborative, with input from all team members. No one person has the authority to order missions without consensus from the team." Elena felt her reservations beginning to weaken. The opportunity to work with people who valued her input and respected her experience was something she hadn't encountered since Gray Fox was disbanded. "Sir, what about accountability? If something goes wrong, If innocent people are hurt, who takes responsibility? Harrison's expression became serious. Captain, that's the most important question you could ask. Task Force Sanctuary operates under the principle of collective responsibility. Every team member is accountable for every mission outcome. Success and failure are shared equally among all participants. Elena walked back to her chair and sat down, her mind racing as she tried to process all the information Harrison had given her. The assignment he was describing sounded like everything she had been hoping to find since leaving Gray Fox, but she had learned to be suspicious of opportunities that seemed too good to be true. Sir, when would I need to make a decision? Harrison consulted his watch. The task force is scheduled to begin operations in 2 weeks. If you're interested, I would need your answer within the next 72 hours to allow time for the necessary security clearances and briefings. Elena stood up, her decision crystallizing as she spoke. Sir, I don't need 72 hours. I'll take the assignment. Harrison looked surprised. Captain, are you sure? This is a significant change from what you've been doing here. Elena smiled, and for the first time since Harrison had known her, the expression reached her eyes. Sir, I've been trying to escape who I am for 4 years. Maybe it's time to stop running and start using my skills for something that actually matters. Harrison stood up and extended his hand. Captain, welcome to Task Force Sanctuary. I think you're going to find that this assignment gives you exactly what you've been looking for. Elena shook his hand, feeling a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. Sir, when do I leave? Harrison consulted the briefing documents. Transportation has been arranged for Thursday morning. You'll fly to a classified location where you'll meet your new team and begin mission preparation. Elena nodded, already beginning to think about what she would need to pack and how she would prepare for this new phase of her career. Sir, what should I tell the personnel here about my departure? Harrison had obviously anticipated this. Question. Your official transfer orders will show a routine reassignment to a classified intelligence position. No one will ask questions, and your departure won't attract any unusual attention. Elena felt a sense of closure that she hadn't experienced since leaving Gray Fox. For the first time in years, she was moving toward something rather than running away from something. Sir, thank you for this opportunity. I won't let you down. Harrison's expression was serious but optimistic. Captain, I have complete confidence in your abilities. But more importantly, I think this assignment will give you the chance to become the person you want to be while still using the skills that make you so valuable. Elena left Harrison's office with a sense of purpose that she hadn't felt in years. The prospect of joining Task Force Sanctuary represented everything she had been hoping to find: the opportunity to serve, the chance to protect innocent people, and the possibility of working with people who understood her background and valued her contributions. Over the next 3 days, Elena prepared for her departure with the same methodical precision she brought to all her activities. She completed her outstanding intelligence projects, transferred her ongoing cases to other analysts, and ensured that her departure wouldn't create any operational gaps for the base's intelligence operations. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez sought her out on her final evening at Al-Hasaka, finding her in the operations center where she was completing her final reports. The center was nearly empty, with only a skeleton crew monitoring communications and maintaining watch on ongoing operations. Ma'am, Rodriguez said, settling into a chair beside her workstation. I heard you're transferring out. Elena looked up from her computer, noting the genuine regret in Rodriguez's expression. That's correct, Staff Sergeant. I've been reassigned to a classified position. Rodriguez nodded, but Elena could see that he had more to say. Ma'am, I want you to know that working with you has been an honor. What you did for Echo Company, the way you supported our missions, it made all the difference. Elena felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't experienced in a long time. Staff Sergeant, it was my privilege to serve with your team. You and your Marines are among the finest soldiers I've ever encountered." Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, clearly struggling with something he wanted to say but wasn't sure how to express. "Ma'am, I don't know what your background is, and I'm not going to ask. But I want you to know that whoever you are, whatever you've done, you saved lives here. That matters more than any official record." Elena felt tears threatening to form. In her eyes, an emotional response that surprised her with its intensity. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant. That means more to me than you can possibly know." Rodriguez stood up, but before leaving, he turned back to Elena one final time. "Ma'am, wherever you're going, whatever you're going to be doing, I hope you find what you're looking for." Elena watched him go, feeling a profound gratitude for the understanding and respect he had shown her. Rodriguez represented the best of what the military could be: professional, dedicated, and genuinely concerned about the welfare of the people he served with. Elena spent her final night at Al-Hasaka, standing on the base perimeter, looking out at the desert landscape that had become both familiar and meaningful during her time there. The stars were brilliant in the clear desert air, and the silence was broken only by the distant sounds of guards walking their posts and equipment humming in the operation centers. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, from her early days in Grey Fox through the trauma of Kandahar province, to her attempt to build a new identity as an intelligence analyst. She realized that she had been trying to become someone she wasn't, attempting to deny capabilities that were fundamental to who she was. But Task Force Sanctuary represented something different: the opportunity to be herself while serving a cause that aligned with her deepest values. Instead of running from her past, she could embrace it and use it to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Elena's transportation arrived early Thursday morning, a nondescript helicopter that would take her to the first stage of her journey to join Task Force Sanctuary. She boarded the aircraft with the same calm professionalism she had displayed throughout her time at Al-Hasaka, carrying only a single duffel bag that contained everything she needed for her new assignment. As the helicopter lifted off and the base fell away below her, Elena felt a sense of completion that she hadn't experienced in years. She was finally moving toward a future that made sense, toward a role that would allow her to be both who she was and who she wanted to become. The desert landscape stretched away in all directions, vast and unforgiving, but also beautiful in its stark simplicity. Elena realized that her time at Al-Hasaka had taught her something important about herself. She couldn't escape her nature, but she could choose how to express it. She could be a weapon, but she could choose what to aim at. She could be a killer, but she could choose to kill in service of protecting life. Elena closed her eyes and settled back in her seat, allowing herself to feel optimistic about the future. For the first time in years, Task Force Sanctuary represented more than just a new assignment. It represented the possibility of redemption, the chance to use her darkest skills in service of her highest values. The helicopter flew on through the morning sky, carrying Elena toward a future that promised both challenge and purpose. She had spent years trying to escape who she was, but now she was finally ready to embrace her true nature and use it to make a difference in the world. Behind her, Al-Hasaka continued its mission of defending against threats that most people would never know existed. The base would remember Captain Vasquez as a competent intelligence analyst who had contributed to successful operations through her analytical skills and professional dedication. But a few people, like Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, would remember her as something more: a guardian angel who had appeared when she was needed most and had disappeared just as quietly when her work was done. Elena's story at Al-Hasaka was ending, but her real story, the story of a woman who had learned to use her most dangerous capabilities in service of her most human values, was just beginning. Task Force Sanctuary would give her the chance to write the next chapters of that story, and for the first time in years, Elena was eager to see how it would unfold. The helicopter continued its journey across the desert, carrying Alina toward a future where she could finally be both the person she was and the person she wanted to become. She had learned that running from your nature was futile, but choosing how to express that nature was the most important decision anyone could make. Alina Vasquez, the woman they had called worthless, was finally going home to a place where her true worth would be recognized and valued. The most dangerous person on base had become exactly what she had always been meant to be: a protector of the innocent, a guardian of the helpless, and a weapon wielded in service of justice and compassion. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.